My professor looked me dead in my face and said, "This exam is designed for students with actual mathematical aptitude. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable in a remedial course." I was the only black student in his advanced calculus class, and he had just handed me a test completely different from everyone else's. But here's what Professor Harrison didn't know. I wasn't just some struggling student who'd wandered into the wrong classroom. I was a mathematical prodigy who'd been solving differential equations since I was 12 years old. I had a photographic memory for formulas. I could visualize complex geometric proofs the way most people see colors. The test he gave me, the impossible test designed to prove I didn't belong, contained problems that would stump graduate students. Problems pulled from doctoral qualifying exams. Problems he was certain would send me running back to where I came from. So how does a 19-year-old black girl from the south side of Chicago end up standing at a podium at MIT, accepting the Fields Medal, the Nobel Prize of Mathematics, while that same professor watches from the audience? How does the student he tried to humiliate become the mathematician whose work he now has to cite in every paper he writes? What happened between that impossible test and the day the university named their mathematics building after me? If this story already has your heart pounding, if you need to know how she turned his weapon into her triumph, hit that subscribe button right now. Like this video for every student who was ever told they weren't smart enough. They need to see what happens next. I'm going to tell you this story the way it deserves to be told. Every humiliation, every victory, every moment that led from that classroom to history. My name is Destiny Amara Robinson, and this is how I made a racist professor regret the day he ever doubted me. Let me take you back to who I was before I learned that some people see your skin color before they see your mind. I grew up on the south side of Chicago, in a neighborhood where gunshots were more common than birdsong, and the local school had more metal detectors than microscopes. My mother, Patricia Robinson, worked double shifts as a hospital janitor, leaving before dawn and returning after dark, her hands cracked from industrial cleaning chemicals, but her spirit somehow unbroken. My father left when I was 4. I don't remember much about him, just a deep voice and the smell of cigarettes and the sound of the door closing one final time. What I remember more clearly is my mother sitting at our kitchen table that night, crying into her hands, then lifting her head and saying, "We don't need him, baby. We have each other, and we have your brain, and that's going to be enough." She was right about one thing. I did have a brain, an unusual one. The first time anyone noticed was in first grade, when my teacher, Mrs. Patterson, gave us a simple addition worksheet. While other kids counted on their fingers, I finished in 90 seconds and started solving the problems in my head using methods I couldn't explain. Methods I would later learn were early forms of algebraic thinking. Mrs. Patterson called my mother in for a conference, convinced I must have cheated. When my mother arrived, still in her hospital uniform, exhausted from a 12-hour shift, Mrs. Patterson presented the evidence. A perfect worksheet completed impossibly fast. "Ask her anything," my mother said quietly. "Go ahead." Mrs. Patterson pulled out a third-grade math workbook and opened to a random page, multiplication problems. I solved them all in my head while she watched, her skepticism slowly transforming into something else. "How are you doing this?" she whispered. "I see it," I said, not knowing how else to explain. "The numbers talk to each other. They tell me what they want to become." That was the day my life changed. Mrs. Patterson connected us with a program for gifted children at the University of Chicago. By 3rd grade, I was taking middle school math. By 6th grade, I was enrolled in high school calculus through a special arrangement. By 8th grade, I was auditing college courses, the youngest student in every room, but never the least capable. The numbers loved me, and I loved them back. My mother sacrificed everything to nurture my gift. She worked extra shifts to pay for textbooks and graphing calculators. She turned down a promotion that would have required relocation, because it would have separated me from the academic programs that were shaping my future. She sat with me at the kitchen table night after night, not understanding a word of the mathematics, but asking questions anyway, making sure I could explain concepts clearly because, if you can teach it to me, baby, you really know it. By the time I was 17, I had options. Scholarship offers from a dozen universities, invitations to summer research programs, the kind of attention that made guidance counselors who'd never spoken to me suddenly claim credit for my success. I chose Hartwell University, a prestigious institution in New England with one of the top mathematics programs in the country. They offered me a full ride, plus a stipend, plus placement in their accelerated track for students with exceptional potential. It seemed like a dream. A poor black girl from the South Side, heading to one of the most elite universities in America, ready to prove that where you come from doesn't determine where you can go. I had no idea that some people would see my presence as an insult rather than an achievement, that my very existence in their spaces would be treated as a problem to be solved. That a man named Professor William Harrison would decide, the moment he saw my face, that I didn't deserve to be in his classroom. I arrived at Hartwell in August, carrying 2 suitcases and a heart full of hope. The campus was everything I'd imagined and nothing I'd prepared for. Gothic architecture rising against gray skis. Students in designer clothes walking dogs that probably cost more than my mother's car. A dining hall with options I'd only seen in magazines, sushi made-to-order omelets, a salad bar that stretched for 20 feet. I was assigned to a dormitory with a roommate named Chelsea Worthington, a blonde girl from Connecticut whose family had endowed one of the campus buildings. She was polite but distant, the way you're polite to service workers whose names you never learn. "So you're the diversity scholarship," she said on our first night, not meanly but not kindly either. "That's cool, I guess. My father says universities need to do more outreach to underprivileged communities." Underprivileged. The word sat in my chest like a stone. "I'm here because I scored higher on the mathematics placement exam than any incoming freshman in 15 years, I said quietly. "But sure, diversity scholarship." Chelsea's expression flickered, something that might have been embarrassment or might have been dismissal, and she returned to unpacking her professionally organized luggage. I learned quickly that Hartwell had 2 faces. The official one, displayed in brochures and admissions materials, celebrated diversity and inclusion. The real one, hidden in microaggressions and assumptions, made clear that some people would never see me as a legitimate member of this community. I was prepared to prove them wrong with performance, with grades so undeniable that prejudice would have nowhere to hide. What I wasn't prepared for was Professor William Harrison. Professor William Harrison was a legend at Hartwell. 57 years old, with silver hair swept back from a high forehead and eyes the color of winter ice. He'd published over 200 papers, trained 3 Fields Medal winners, and built a reputation as one of the most brilliant and most demanding mathematicians of his generation. He was also, I would soon discover, one of the most prejudiced. I didn't know any of this when I walked into his advanced Calculus III course on the first day of sophomore year. What I knew was that his class was notoriously difficult, that he accepted only 12 students per semester, and that completing his sequence was considered the golden ticket to graduate school at any institution in the world. I'd earned my place through a combination of test scores and departmental recommendation. After a stellar freshman year, straight A's, including perfect scores in 2 courses that curved, because no one had ever aced them before, I was exactly the kind of student who should have been welcomed into Professor Harrison's elite seminar. Instead, I was met with the coldest eyes I'd ever encountered. I remember walking into that classroom, immediately aware that I was the only black face among the 12 students. That wasn't unusual at Hartwell. I'd grown accustomed to being the only one. What was unusual was the way Professor Harrison's gaze traveled over me, lingered, and then dismissed me before I'd even taken my seat. "You must be the affirmative action placement," he said, not even bothering to check the roster. "Miss Robinson, I presume." The room went quiet. 11 other students, all white or Asian, mostly male, turned to look at me with expressions ranging from curiosity to second-hand embarrassment. I'm Destiny Robinson. Yes, I qualified for this course through the standard placement process. The standard process, he smiled thinly. Of course. Well, Miss Robinson, I hope you're prepared to work harder than you've ever worked in your life. This isn't a community college. We have standards here. I felt heat rising in my cheeks, but kept my voice steady. I'm familiar with standards, Professor. I look forward to meeting yours. Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, that I hadn't crumbled under his casual cruelty. He turned back to the board without another word and began the lecture. For the next 90 minutes, I took meticulous notes, solved every practice problem he threw at the class, and refused to show any sign of the anger burning in my chest. If he wanted to test me, I would give him nothing to criticize. After class, I approached his desk with a question about one of the theorems. A genuine question, the kind of intellectual engagement that should have delighted any professor. He looked at me like I'd tracked mud on his carpet. Office hours are posted on the syllabus, Miss Robinson. Perhaps you should work on your reading comprehension along with your mathematical skills. I walked out of that room with my jaw clenched, so tight my teeth ached. The pattern established itself over the following weeks. In class, Professor Harrison would call on students randomly, but I was called on constantly, forced to solve problems at the board while he scrutinized my every stroke, pouncing on the smallest hesitation as evidence of inadequacy. Taking our time, are we, Miss Robinson? Perhaps the concepts are a bit beyond your preparation. When I solved problems correctly, which was almost always, he'd find something to criticize. My notation was unconventional. My methods were unorthodox. My conclusions, though correct, were arrived at through questionable reasoning. The same solutions from other students were praised as elegant and innovative. I started documenting everything, every comment, every grade, every instance of differential treatment. I photographed my assignments next to classmates' assignments, showing identical approaches receiving vastly different evaluations. I kept a journal of his remarks, dated and detailed. My mother had taught me this lesson years ago. When people treat you unfairly, paper trails matter. Feelings can be dismissed. Documentation cannot. The other students noticed what was happening. Some avoided me, not wanting to be associated with the professor's target. Others offered quiet support, a sympathetic glance, a whispered that wasn't fair after a particularly brutal class. One student, James Chen, became something like an ally. James was the only other scholarship kid in the class, not a diversity scholarship, as Professor Harrison might put it, but a financial aid student whose family had immigrated from Taiwan when he was young. He understood, in his own way, what it felt like to have your legitimacy questioned. He's testing you, James said one evening in the library where we'd formed a study partnership. Trying to make you crack. Why? What did I ever do to him? You existed. You got into his classroom. You're proof that the world is changing in ways he doesn't like. James shrugged. My grandmother has a saying, the nail that sticks up gets hammered down. He's trying to hammer you. So what do I do? You become unhammerable. You get so good that he can't deny it. You document everything, build your case, and when the time comes, you use it. And if that's not enough? James smiled grimly. Then you burn it all down, but you try the other way first. The midterm was my first real chance to prove myself undeniably. I studied for 3 weeks straight, sleeping 4 hours a night, reviewing not just the course material but related proofs from graduate-level textbooks. I wanted to be so overprepared that nothing could surprise me. When the exam papers were distributed, I noticed immediately that mine was different. The other students received a stapled packet of 5 pages. Mine was 8 pages, and when I scanned the problems, my blood ran cold. These weren't midterm questions. These were doctoral qualifying exam problems. Questions designed to challenge students with years more training than I had. Questions that would require not just knowledge, but genuine mathematical creativity to solve. I looked up and found Professor Harrison watching me with that thin smile. Problem, Miss Robinson. The room was silent. Everyone knew something was wrong, but no one said anything. No problem, Professor, I heard myself say. Just getting oriented. You have 2 hours. I suggest you use them wisely. I looked down at the impossible test in front of me, at the problems designed to guarantee my failure, at the weapon this man had crafted specifically to destroy me. And I started solving. The first problem was a proof in advanced topology, a field I wouldn't formally study for another 2 years. But I'd read ahead. I'd always read ahead. While other kids my age were watching television, I'd been devouring mathematics textbooks like novels, falling in love with the elegant logic of proofs and theorems. I recognized the problem. It was a variation of a famous conjecture, modified just enough to require original thinking rather than memorized solutions. My pencil began to move. For the next 2 hours, I existed in a state of pure focus I'd rarely achieved before. The classroom disappeared. The other students disappeared. Professor Harrison and his smug smile disappeared. There was only me and the numbers, dancing together in the space behind my eyes. Problem 1, completed. Problem 2, a differential equations nightmare that required 3 separate techniques I'd taught myself from graduate textbooks. Completed. Problem 3, a proof so complex it sprawled across 4 pages of my blue book, each step building on the last like a cathedral rising from foundation to spire. Completed. By the time I reached the final problem, my hand was cramping and sweat had dampened my collar. This one was different from the others, not just difficult, but genuinely unsolved. I recognized it from a paper I'd read last summer, a problem that had stumped professional mathematicians for over a decade. He'd given me an unsolved problem as part of a midterm exam. The audacity of it almost made me laugh. He wasn't just trying to fail me. He was trying to humiliate me with something literally impossible. But as I stared at the equations, something began to emerge. A pattern I'd never seen described in any textbook. A connection between 2 approaches that had always been treated as separate. I didn't solve the problem. No one could solve it in 2 hours. But I did something perhaps more impressive. I developed a novel approach, outlined a proof strategy, and demonstrated 3 preliminary results that advanced the problem further than anyone had in years. When time was called, I'd filled 9 pages of my blue book with the most intense mathematical work of my life. I handed it directly to Professor Harrison, meeting his eyes as I did. I believe you'll find everything in order, I said quietly. Though I notice problem 7 appears to be the Thornburg-Williams conjecture, I wasn't aware that had been solved. His expression flickered, the first crack I'd seen in his composure. Just hand in your exam, Miss Robinson. I walked out of that classroom with my head high, but my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I'd done everything I could. Now I had to wait. The grades were posted 1 week later. I stood in front of the mathematics department bulletin board, surrounded by other students checking their results, and felt the world tilt beneath my feet. D-. After everything I'd done, the perfect solutions, the advanced techniques, the novel approach to an unsolved problem, Professor Harrison had given me a D-. I pulled down the grade sheet to look at the breakdown. Next to my name, a single comment: lacks fundamental understanding. Recommend remedial review. Behind me, James appeared, his own exam in hand. Destiny, what? He saw the grade sheet in my trembling hands. That's not possible. I saw your work. You solved problems I couldn't even understand. Apparently not well enough. No, his voice was fierce. This is wrong. This is demonstrably, provably wrong. You need to challenge this. Challenge a tenured professor with 30 years at this institution. A man whose word carries more weight than any student's. You have documentation, right? Your notes, your methods. I have everything, but who's going to believe me over him? James was quiet for a moment. Then, what about Dr. Okonkwo? Dr. Adiz Okonkwo, was the only black professor in Hartwell's mathematics department. She'd arrived 3 years earlier from MIT, a specialist in algebraic geometry whose work was considered groundbreaking. She was also, I'd heard through quiet channels, a fierce advocate for students of color in STEM, though she had to be careful about how openly she advocated. I'd never spoken to her directly. We existed in different spheres. She was a rising star in research mathematics, while I was just an undergraduate trying to survive. But James was right. If anyone would understand what I was facing, it would be her. I requested a meeting through the department office, expecting to wait weeks. She responded within hours. "Come to my office at 4. Bring everything you have." Dr. Okonkwo's office was a revelation. Walls covered with mathematical diagrams, shelves overflowing with books and papers, a small Nigerian flag on her desk next to photographs of what appeared to be family members in graduation regalia. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 40s, with natural hair twisted into an elegant updo and eyes that seemed to see everything. "Sit," she said, gesturing to a chair across from her desk. "Tell me everything, from the beginning." I talked for almost an hour. The first day of class, the constant targeting, the impossible test, the grade that made no mathematical sense. I showed her my documentation, the photographs, the journal, the comparison sheets. She reviewed everything in silence, her expression unreadable. When she reached my midterm blue book, which I'd photographed before handing in, a precaution that now seemed prescient, she stopped cold. "You did this during the exam?" "Yes, ma'am." This approach to the Thornburg-Williams problem. She looked up at me with an expression I couldn't name. "Destiny, do you understand what you've done here?" I tried to solve it. I know I didn't complete the proof, but... "You advanced it, significantly. This preliminary work..." She tapped the pages with something approaching awe. "This is publishable. This is graduate-level insight, done under exam conditions by a sophomore." But he gave me a D-. "Yes," her expression hardened into something dangerous. "He did, and we're going to do something about that." She closed my blue book and folded her hands on her desk. "What I'm about to propose will not be easy. It will make you enemies. It may damage your relationship with this department in ways that follow you for years." She paused. "But it will also be right, and sometimes that's what matters most." "What are you proposing?" "A formal challenge, not just of this grade, but of his entire pattern of behavior toward you. We present your documentation to the Academic Integrity Board. We demand an independent review of your exam by external mathematicians. We shine a light so bright on what he's done that he has nowhere to hide." "Will it work?" Dr. Okonkwo smiled, a fierce, sharp smile that made her look like a warrior preparing for battle. "Professor Harrison has been protected by this institution for 30 years because no one has ever challenged him properly. No one has ever brought evidence this thorough, arguments this undeniable, or allies willing to fight alongside them." She leaned forward. "He's never faced anyone like us, and that, destiny, is going to be his downfall." The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in strategic warfare. Dr. Okonkwo assembled a team with the precision of a military commander. She contacted colleagues at other institutions, mathematicians she trusted, people with no connection to Hartwell or Professor Harrison, and asked them to review my midterm exam blind, without knowing whose work it was or what grade it had received. The results came back unanimous. "This is exceptional work," wrote a professor from Stanford. "Whoever produced this has genuine mathematical talent. I would estimate upper division graduate student based on the sophistication of the approaches." "The preliminary results on Problem 7 are publishable," wrote another from Princeton. "Has this student considered pursuing research opportunities? If this is undergraduate work, I want to recruit this person immediately," wrote a third from Cambridge. 7 external reviewers. 7 independent confirmations that my exam was not just passing, but extraordinary. Dr. Okonkwo spread the evaluations across her desk with quiet satisfaction. This is undeniable, objective, beyond dispute. She looked at me. Are you ready for what comes next? What comes next? We file the formal challenge, and then the real battle begins. The Academic Integrity Board met in a wood-paneled room in the administration building, a space designed to intimidate, with portraits of past university presidents staring down from the walls like disapproving ghosts. I sat at one end of a long table, flanked by Dr. Okonkwo and a student advocate named Marcus Webb, a third-year law student who volunteered with the university's Student Rights Office. At the other end sat Professor Harrison, accompanied by the department chair and a university attorney whose presence suggested they were taking this more seriously than they wanted to admit. The board itself consisted of 5 faculty members from various departments, chaired by a dean of academic affairs named Dr. Elizabeth Hartley. We're here today to review a grade challenge filed by Miss Destiny Robinson regarding her midterm examination in Advanced Calculus III, Dr. Hartley began. Miss Robinson, please present your case. I'd prepared for days, practiced in front of mirrors, rehearsed with Dr. Okonkwo until every word was precise and every argument was airtight. But nothing could have prepared me for the reality of facing Professor Harrison across that table, watching his contemptuous smile as I stood to speak. Thank you, Dr. Hartley. I'm challenging the D- grade I received on my midterm examination on grounds of discriminatory evaluation and academic prejudice. Professor Harrison scoffed audibly. The university attorney placed a hand on his arm. On the day of the exam, I continued, I received a test that was materially different from those given to other students. While my classmates received a 5-page exam covering course material, I received an 8-page exam containing problems from doctoral qualifying exams and, in one case, an unsolved mathematical conjecture. I placed copies of both exams on the table, mine and the standard version I'd obtained from James. The differences are evident to anyone who reviews them. But more importantly, I'm submitting independent evaluations of my work from 7 mathematicians at institutions including Stanford, Princeton, Cambridge, and MIT. I laid out the evaluations one by one, watching the board members' expressions shift as they scanned the assessments. Every external reviewer concluded that my work demonstrated exceptional mathematical ability at the graduate level or beyond. Several expressed interest in recruiting me for their own programs. None, not one, rated my performance as anything less than excellent. I paused, letting the weight of the evidence settle. I received a D- and a recommendation for remedial review. The only explanation for this discrepancy is that my work was not evaluated on its merits, but on Professor Harrison's predetermined conclusion about my capabilities, a conclusion based not on my academic record, which is exemplary, but on his assumptions about what someone who looks like me can achieve. Professor Harrison was invited to respond. He stood with the languid confidence of a man who had faced no real accountability in 3 decades. His voice was measured, almost amused, as if this entire proceeding was beneath him. Miss Robinson is a talented young woman with a persecution complex, he began. Yes, I gave her a more challenging exam. That's a privilege I reserve for students who need additional testing to confirm their placement was appropriate. Additional testing, Dr. Hartley interrupted. Is that standard departmental policy? It's my prerogative as course instructor to evaluate students as I see fit. And the external evaluations. How do you explain 7 independent mathematicians reaching conclusions dramatically different from your own? Professor Harrison's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. With respect, Dean Hartley, those evaluators didn't see Miss Robinson in class. They didn't observe her struggles with basic concepts. They didn't witness her. He paused, as if searching for diplomatic phrasing, her difficulty keeping up with the pace of rigorous mathematical discussion. I felt my hands clench under the table. Every word he spoke was a lie. I had never struggled in his class. I had solved every problem he'd thrown at me, but he was betting on his word carrying more weight than mine. Dr. Okonkwo spoke for the first time. "May I address the board?" Dr. Hartley nodded. "I've reviewed Miss Robinson's complete academic record at this institution." She opened a folder. In her freshman year, she achieved perfect scores in Introduction to Abstract Mathematics and Linear Algebra, courses that, I should note, are taught by Professor Harrison's own colleagues. She received glowing evaluations from every faculty member who has instructed her. Not one has ever described her as struggling or having difficulty. She placed the records on the table. "I also obtained enrollment statistics for Professor Harrison's courses over the past 15 years. In that time, 23 students of color have enrolled in his advanced seminars. Would the board like to know how many completed the sequence?" Silence. Four out of 23, an attrition rate of over 80%, compared to 22% for white students in the same courses. Professor Harrison's face reddened. "Those statistics are misleading. Correlation isn't causation. 19 students of color withdrew or failed out of your courses," Dr. Okonkwo continued, her voice calm and relentless. "I've contacted 11 of them. 8 were willing to share their experiences. Their accounts describe patterns remarkably similar to what Miss Robinson has documented." She produced a stack of written statements, each signed and dated. Differential testing, dismissive commentary, grades that didn't match performance, a systematic pattern of discrimination hidden behind the shield of academic discretion. The room was absolutely silent. The board members were staring at the growing pile of evidence with expressions ranging from discomfort to horror. Professor Harrison stood abruptly, his composure finally cracking. "This is a witch hunt. I will not sit here and be accused of racism by—" "By whom?" Dr. Okonkwo asked quietly. "By a tenured colleague, by a dozen former students, by 7 external mathematicians who evaluated Miss Robinson's work without knowing her race." She let the question hang. "Exactly whose word do you find unacceptable, Professor Harrison?" The board deliberated for 3 days. "I tried to continue my life normally, attending classes, doing homework, pretending that my entire future wasn't hanging in the balance. But sleep was impossible. Food was tasteless. Every hour felt like a year." James checked in constantly, bringing coffee and reassurance. Dr. Okonkwo called each evening with updates, her voice carefully neutral but carrying undertones of cautious optimism. "They're taking it seriously," she said on the second night. "That's more than I expected. Usually these things get swept under the rug. And if they rule against me? Then we appeal to the provost, and if that fails, we go public. We take this story to every media outlet that will listen." Her voice hardened. "One way or another, destiny, the truth comes out. They can't silence both of us." On the morning of the 4th day, I received a summons to return to the hearing room. The decision was in. I walked into that hearing room with my heart in my throat. The same wood-paneled walls, the same portraits of past presidents, the same long table where my future had been debated by strangers who held my dreams in their hands. But something was different this time. Professor Harrison sat alone at his end of the table, without the department chair, without the university attorney. His face was gray, his posture deflated, a man who already knew what was coming. Dr. Hartley stood as I entered, her expression carefully neutral, but something flickering behind her eyes that might have been respect. "Miss Robinson, please be seated. We have reached our decision." I sat beside Dr. Okonkwo, who squeezed my hand briefly under the table. "After extensive deliberation and review of all evidence presented," Dr. Hartley began, "this board has reached the following conclusions." She opened a folder and began reading. "First, the midterm examination administered to Miss Robinson was materially different from those given to other students, containing problems significantly beyond the scope of the course curriculum. This practice was not disclosed to the student and was not consistent with departmental policy." I felt Dr. Okonkwo's hand tighten on mine. "Second, the grade assigned to Miss Robinson's examination was inconsistent with the quality of work demonstrated. as confirmed by 7 independent external evaluations from mathematicians at peer institutions. Professor Harrison shifted in his seat, his jaw clenched. Third, a pattern of differential treatment towards students of color in Professor Harrison's courses has been documented through statistical analysis and corroborating testimony from former students. Dr. Hartley looked up from her papers, her gaze moving between me and Professor Harrison. Based on these findings, the board orders the following remedies. Miss Robinson's midterm grade is hereby changed from D- to A+, reflecting the actual quality of her work as assessed by external reviewers. Additionally, Miss Robinson's preliminary work on the Thornburg-Williams conjecture will be formally acknowledged in departmental records as original mathematical research conducted under examination conditions. Tears were streaming down my face now. I couldn't stop them. Furthermore, Dr. Hartley continued, her voice growing harder, Professor William Harrison is hereby placed on administrative leave pending a comprehensive investigation into his grading practices over the past 15 years. All students of color who received failing or substandard grades in his courses will be offered the opportunity for external review of their work. Professor Harrison stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This is outrageous. 30 years I've given to this institution. Professor Harrison, Dr. Hartley's voice cut like ice, you are excused. Your continued presence is neither required nor welcome. For a long moment, he stood frozen, his face contorted with rage and disbelief. Then, without another word, he gathered his papers and walked out of the room. The door closed behind him, with a sound like a period at the end of a sentence. The aftermath was both chaotic and clarifying. News of the board's decision spread through the mathematics department like wildfire. Within hours, my inbox was flooded with messages, some supportive, some hostile, all overwhelming. "You're a hero," wrote a sophomore I'd never met. "I've been scared of Harrison since freshman year. Thank you for fighting." "You ruined a great man's career," wrote an anonymous sender. "I hope you're happy." I wasn't happy exactly. I was exhausted, drained, hollowed out by weeks of stress and uncertainty. But beneath the exhaustion, something else was taking root, something that felt like justice. Dr. Okonkwo took me to dinner that night, a small Nigerian restaurant off campus where we could talk without being overheard. "You did something remarkable today," she said over plates of jollof rice and fried plantains. "Not just for yourself, but for everyone who comes after you. Every Black student who walks into a mathematics classroom at this university will walk a little taller because of what you achieved." I just wanted to be evaluated fairly. That's exactly the point. Wanting to be evaluated fairly shouldn't be revolutionary. But in a world built on unfair systems, demanding fairness becomes an act of rebellion. She smiled. "You're a revolutionary, Destiny, whether you wanted to be or not." What happens now to Professor Harrison? The investigation will take months. They'll review every grade he's ever given, interview every student who's willing to talk. If the pattern holds, and I believe it will, he'll never teach again. She paused. He may also face legal consequences. Several of the former students I contacted are considering civil action. And my work, the stuff on the Thornburg-Williams problem. Dr. Okonkwo's smile widened. "That's the part I've been waiting to tell you. I showed your preliminary results to a colleague at Princeton, one of the external reviewers. He wants to collaborate with you on developing the proof further. If your approach works, Destiny, you could be part of solving a problem that stumped mathematicians for over a decade." I stared at her, unable to process what she was saying. I'm 19 years old. And Andrew Wiles was 52 when he proved Fermat's last theorem. Maryam Mirzakhani was 37 when she won the Fields Medal. Age is irrelevant in mathematics. What matters is the quality of your ideas. She leaned forward. Your ideas, Destiny, are extraordinary. Don't let anyone, Harrison, doubters, your own imposter syndrome, convince you otherwise. The collaboration with Princeton began that summer. Dr. Richard Oyelaran, the professor who'd reviewed my exam, invited me to spend 8 weeks at his research institute, working alongside graduate students and postdocs on the Thornburg-Williams problem. My approach, the one I developed in 2 hours under exam conditions, became the foundation for a new proof strategy. It was grueling work. There were days when the mathematics seemed impossible, when every path led to dead ends, when I wondered if I'd reached the limits of my ability. But there were also breakthroughs, moments when the numbers aligned and something beautiful emerged from the chaos. Moments when I could feel my grandmother's spirit beside me, whispering that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. By the end of the summer, we had a proof. Not complete, there were still gaps that needed filling, lemmas that needed proving, but the framework was solid. Dr. Euleren called it the most significant advance on this problem in 20 years. My name would be on the paper, co-author on a publication that would appear in the Annals of Mathematics, one of the most prestigious journals in the field. I was 19 years old, and I was about to become part of mathematical history. Back at Hartwell, the investigation into Professor Harrison had concluded. The findings were devastating. Over 15 years, he had systematically discriminated against students of color in his courses. Grades had been manipulated. Recommendations had been sabotaged. Careers had been destroyed before they'd even begun. 23 students were offered grade corrections. 17 accepted, their transcripts finally reflecting their actual abilities. Several had already graduated and moved into other fields, their mathematical dreams abandoned after Harrison crushed their confidence. Professor William Harrison was terminated for cause, stripped of tenure, banned from campus, his name removed from the endowed chair he'd held for 2 decades. He gave an interview to a sympathetic alumni magazine, claiming he was the victim of political correctness and lowered standards. He said he'd been targeted for refusing to compromise academic rigor. I didn't respond publicly. I didn't need to. My work spoke for itself, and his silence in the mathematical community, his sudden irrelevance after decades of acclaim, spoke even louder. The paper was published in my junior year. A novel approach to the Thornburg-Williams conjecture, preliminary results and proof framework, 12 pages that represented 18 months of work, 3 summers of collaboration, and countless sleepless nights staring at equations until they blurred together. My name appeared second in the author list, Euleren, R. and Robinson, D. Seeing those words in print, in the Annals of Mathematics, the journal where the greatest proofs in history had been published, felt like stepping into a dream I hadn't dared to dream. The mathematical community's response was immediate and intense. Within weeks, researchers around the world were building on our framework, filling in gaps, extending our methods to related problems. Citations accumulated. Conference invitations arrived. Graduate programs that had never heard of me were suddenly sending recruitment materials with handwritten notes from department chairs. We would be honored to have you consider our program. Your work on Thornburg-Williams represents exactly the kind of innovative thinking we value. Full funding, of course, plus a research stipend, whatever you need. I was 20 years old, still an undergraduate, and the mathematical world was opening doors I hadn't known existed. But success brought its own challenges. As my profile rose, so did the scrutiny. Not everyone was pleased to see a young black woman from the south side of Chicago disrupting the comfortable hierarchies of academic mathematics. The comments section of every article about my work became a battlefield. Affirmative action mathematics. Lower the standards enough and anyone can succeed. Let's see if she can replicate this without her Princeton handlers holding her hand. Another diversity hire being celebrated for mediocre work. This is what's wrong with academia. I tried not to read them. Dr. Okonkwo had warned me that visibility came with vulnerability, that every achievement would be met with attempts to diminish it. They can't attack your mathematics, she said. So they attack you. Your credentials, your background, your right to exist in spaces they've claimed as their own. How do I make it stop? You don't. You keep working. You keep producing results they can't deny. You build a body of work so undeniable that the noise becomes irrelevant. So that's what I did. Graduate school was a different kind of crucible. I chose MIT, partly for its mathematical pedigree, partly because Dr. Eulerin had connections there, and partly because I wanted to prove I could thrive in the most demanding environment imaginable. The first year nearly broke me. The coursework was relentless. The expectations were impossibly high. And the culture, the unspoken assumption that everyone around you was smarter, more prepared, more deserving, created a constant pressure that made breathing feel like labor. I wasn't the only one struggling. Graduate students dropped out regularly, their dreams crushed by a system that seemed designed to identify weakness and exploit it. But I noticed that students who looked like me dropped out at higher rates, their exits treated as confirmations of limitations rather than failures of support. I refused to become a statistic. I found my community, other students of color navigating the same hostile terrain, forming study groups and support networks and emergency contact lists for nights when the pressure became unbearable. We held each other up. We celebrated each other's victories. We mourned each other's setbacks without judgment. And slowly, painfully, I began to thrive. My dissertation focused on extending the Thornburg-Williams work into new territory, connections between algebraic geometry and number theory that no one had explored before. My advisor, Dr. Amara Obi, a Nigerian-American woman who'd fought her own battles through the academic system, pushed me harder than anyone ever had. "Your ideas are good," she said after reviewing my first draft. "But good isn't enough. You need to be undeniable. You need to produce work so rigorous that no one can dismiss it, no matter how much they want to." Is that even possible, being undeniable? No, she admitted. There will always be people who deny, but you can make their denial look foolish. You can make the mathematics speak so loudly that their objections become whispers. I defended my dissertation at 24. The defense was grueling. 4 hours of questioning by a committee that included some of the most respected mathematicians in the world. They probed every assumption, challenged every conclusion, demanded justification for every step of my reasoning. When they finally called me back into the room, my advisor was smiling. "Congratulations, Dr. Robinson. The committee has unanimously approved your dissertation. We're recommending it for the university's Outstanding Dissertation Award." I burst into tears. 4 years of work, thousands of hours of struggle, moments of doubt so profound I'd nearly quit a dozen times. And now, 3 letters that changed everything: PhD. That night, I called my mother. It was late in Chicago, but she answered on the first ring. She always did when she saw my number. "Baby, is everything okay?" "I did it, Mama. I'm Dr. Robinson now." The sound she made, half laugh, half sob, was the most beautiful thing I'd ever heard. "Your grandmother is dancing in heaven right now. Your father," she stopped, collected herself. "I mean, your grandfather, all of them. Everyone who came before you, everyone who sacrificed so you could have this moment. They're all dancing. I couldn't have done it without you, without everything you gave up." "I didn't give up anything, baby. I invested. And look at the returns." The academic job market was brutal, but my reputation preceded me. I received offers from 12 universities, each competing to add my name to their faculty. I chose to return to Hartwell, the same institution that had nearly destroyed me, now begging me to come back as a professor. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. "Why?" James asked when I told him my decision. He was in finance now, having left academia after his own PhD, but we'd stayed close over the years. "After everything they put you through. Because the students there need someone who looks like them, someone who fought the same battles and survived." I paused. "And because I want to walk those halls as faculty. I want every person who doubted me to see exactly what I became." "That's not petty at all," he laughed. "It's not about petty. It's about proof. It's about showing the next Destiny Robinson that she can survive this place, that she can more than survive. She can conquer." My first day as assistant professor of mathematics, I walked past the building where Professor Harrison had once held court. His name had been removed from every honor, every award, every plaque. In its place was a new dedication, the Okonkwo Robinson Center for Mathematical Excellence. Dr. Okonkwo and I had endowed it together, funding scholarships for students from underrepresented backgrounds, creating the support system that neither of us had when we needed it most. I stood in front of that building for a long moment, remembering the girl who'd sat in Harrison's classroom, terrified and determined, clutching an impossible test. She'd made it, against every odd, every obstacle, every person who told her she didn't belong. And she was just getting started. The years that followed were filled with purpose I hadn't known was possible. As a professor at Hartwell, I taught the same courses that had once been weaponized against me: advanced calculus III, abstract algebra, graduate seminars in algebraic geometry. But I taught them differently than Harrison ever had, not as gatekeepers designed to weed out the unworthy, but as invitations into a world of beauty and logic that belonged to anyone willing to work. My classroom became a sanctuary. I saw them every semester, students who reminded me of myself, black and brown faces in a sea of white, carrying the same weight of expectation and doubt I'd carried. Students whose brilliance was obvious to anyone willing to look, but who'd been conditioned to question whether they belonged. I made it my mission to show them they did. Mathematics doesn't care what you look like, I told every new class on the first day. It doesn't care where you came from, what language you spoke first, how much money your parents have. It only cares about the quality of your ideas. And your ideas, I would pause, making eye contact with every student who looked uncertain, are welcome here. Some of them cried. I understood why. One student, in particular, changed how I understood my own journey. Her name was Imani Washington. She arrived in my advanced calculus course as a freshman, 17 years old, from a neighborhood in Baltimore that made my South Side origins look privileged. She taught herself calculus from YouTube videos because her high school didn't offer it. She'd scored perfectly on the mathematics SAT despite never having access to prep courses or tutors. And she was terrified. "I don't think I should be here, Dr. Robinson," she said during office hours in the second week, her voice barely above a whisper. "Everyone else seems to understand things so fast. I have to work twice as hard just to keep up." "Imani, look at me." I waited until her eyes met mine. "Do you know what you just described? Working twice as hard? That's not a weakness. That's what it takes when you're learning without the advantages others had. That's what I did. That's what every successful person from a background like ours does." "But what if I fail?" "Then you'll learn something from failing and try again. That's how mathematics works. That's how life works." I leaned forward. "But Imani, you're not going to fail. You know how I know." She shook her head. "Because I've read your problem sets. I've seen how your mind works. You don't just solve problems, you understand them. You see patterns that other students miss." I smiled. "You remind me of someone I knew once, a scared girl from Chicago who thought she didn't belong. She turned out okay." Imani graduated summa cum laude 4 years later. She's at Stanford now, pursuing her PhD, on track to become exactly the mathematician she never believed she could be. She's one of dozens. Students I've mentored, encouraged, pushed to see themselves the way I learned to see myself. Each one is a repudiation of everything Professor Harrison believed. Each one is proof that the mathematics belongs to us too. The research continued alongside the teaching. The Thornburg-Williams work evolved into something larger, a new theoretical framework connecting disparate fields of mathematics in ways that had seemed impossible. I published paper after paper, each building on the last, each pushing the boundaries of what was known. By 32, I had tenure. By 35, I was full professor, the youngest in Hartwell's history, and the first Black woman to hold that rank in the mathematics department. But the recognition that mattered most came from the mathematical community itself. The prizes accumulated: the Salem Prize, the Clay Research Award, the National Academy of Sciences membership. Each one was validation, not of my worth as a person, which I'd learned didn't depend on external recognition, but of the work itself. The ideas I'd developed were changing how mathematicians understood fundamental structures. And then, in the spring of my 37th year, the phone call came. I was in my office, grading problem sets, when Dr. Okonkwo appeared in my doorway with tears streaming down her face. "Adiz, what's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong, baby." She was laughing and crying at the same time. "Everything is right. Everything is so beautifully right." "What are you talking about?" She walked to my desk and placed her phone in front of me. On the screen was an email from the International Mathematical Union. "Read it." My hands trembled as I scrolled through the formal language, the congratulations, the announcement that would be made public in 3 weeks. The Fields Medal, the highest honor in mathematics, awarded only once every 4 years to mathematicians under 40. I had won. "This isn't real," I whispered. "It's real, Destiny. You did it. You really did it." The ceremony was held in Helsinki that August. I walked onto that stage in front of 3,000 mathematicians from around the world, wearing a dress my mother had helped me choose during a tearful video call, carrying the weight of everyone who'd helped me reach this moment. My mother was in the audience. She'd never been on an airplane before, but she said she'd walk to Finland if she had to. Dr. Okonkwo sat beside her, the woman who'd believed in me when belief felt impossible. James had flown in from New York. Imani had taken a break from her research to witness history. And somewhere in the back of the auditorium, according to the attendee list I'd glimpsed backstage, sat William Harrison. Retired now, disgraced, attending his first major mathematical conference in years, perhaps hopping to reclaim some fragment of relevance in a field that had moved on without him. I didn't acknowledge his presence. I didn't need to. When I stepped to the podium, I spoke about the mathematics, the beautiful, rigorous ideas that had consumed my life for nearly 2 decades. But I also spoke about the journey. "I stand here today not as an exception, but as evidence," I said, my voice carrying across the silent auditorium. "Evidence that mathematical brilliance exists in every community, every neighborhood, every population that has been told it doesn't belong in rooms like this." I looked out at the sea of faces, so many still white, still male, still reflecting a world that hadn't fully changed. Somewhere right now, there's a little girl solving equations in a notebook she hides because her classmates make fun of her for being too smart. There's a boy in an underfunded school whose teacher never learned to recognize his gifts. There's a young person who's been told, explicitly or implicitly, that people like them don't become mathematicians. I paused. I was that girl. I was told I didn't belong. I was given impossible tests designed to prove I wasn't worthy. And I'm standing here today, holding the highest honor my field can offer. I raised the medal slightly. This isn't just for me. It's for every person who was ever told their mind wasn't good enough, their background wasn't right enough, their face wasn't familiar enough. It's proof that they were wrong. All of them, throughout history, who tried to keep the doors closed, they were wrong. The applause began slowly, then built to something thunderous. And as the room rose to its feet, I let myself glance toward the back of the auditorium, toward the man who had tried to destroy me before I'd even begun. He wasn't applauding, he was leaving. Walking out of the room, away from the celebration. Away from the undeniable proof that everything he believed had been proven wrong. I watched him go without satisfaction, without vindication, without any of the emotions I might have expected. I felt only peace. 5 years have passed since Helsinki. I'm sitting in my office at Hartwell, in the building that still bears Dr. Okonkwo's name and mine. Outside my window, students are walking across the quad, a more diverse group than I remember from my undergraduate days, reflecting the slow but steady transformation of the university. My mother passed away last winter, peacefully, surrounded by family and photographs of everything we'd achieved together. At her funeral, I didn't talk about mathematics or medals or academic politics. I talked about kitchen tables and hospital uniforms and the fierce, unshakable love that convinced a girl from the South Side she could be anything. She invested, I told the congregation. She invested everything she had in a dream she couldn't fully understand but completely believed in, and because of her, I stand here today. I miss her every day, but I feel her too, in the moments when a proof finally clicks into place, in the eyes of the students I mentor, in the quiet confidence that I belong exactly where I am. The Okonkwo Robinson Center has grown beyond anything we imagined. We fund scholarships, yes, but we also run summer programs for high school students from underserved communities. Kids like Imani, kids like me, kids who need to see mathematics as something beautiful and accessible rather than something frightening and exclusive. We host workshops for teachers, training them to recognize mathematical talent that doesn't look like traditional mathematical talent. We advocate for policy changes that remove barriers to advanced coursework. Last year, one of our summer program alumni, a young man named Marcus from Detroit, was accepted to Hartwell on a full scholarship. He stopped by my office during his first week, carrying a stack of books and a nervous smile. Dr. Robinson, I just wanted to say thank you for the program, for everything. You did the work, Marcus. We just opened the door. Yeah, but knowing you did it first, knowing you sat in these classrooms and dealt with everything you dealt with, it makes it easier. Like, if you could survive Harrison, I can survive anything. I smiled. You won't have to survive anything like Harrison. That's why we're here, to make sure the path is smoother for you than it was for us. But it's still hard. It's still hard, I agreed. Mathematics is hard. Being the first or the only one in a room is hard, but hard isn't impossible, and you're ready for hard. I still think about that impossible test, sometimes. The 8 pages of problems designed to break me. The unsolved conjecture meant to humiliate me. The sheer, deliberate cruelty of a teacher using his power to crush a student's spirit. For years, I looked at that test as a weapon used against me. But lately, I've started to see it differently. That test was a gift. Without it, I might never have discovered the depths of my own ability. I might never have pushed myself to solve problems beyond my level. I might never have developed the resilience that carried me through graduate school and professional challenges. Without Harrison's hatred, I might never have found Dr. Okonkwo's support. I might never have built the community that sustains me. I might never have become the advocate I needed to be. He tried to bury me. He didn't know I was a seed. As I sit here now, surrounded by the life I built from the pieces of what others tried to destroy, I wish I could go back and talk to that 19-year-old girl in the classroom. She was so scared, so certain that her future hung by a thread, so convinced that one man's prejudice could define her worth. I wish I could tell her what I know now. That his test wasn't a measurement of her ability, it was a measurement of his fear. That his rejection wasn't a verdict on her potential, it was a confession of his limitation. That the very things he tried to use to break her would become the foundation of her legend. If you're watching this and you see yourself in my story, if you've been told you're not smart enough, not prepared enough, not the right fit for the dreams you carry, I need you to hear me. Their tests do not define you. Their doubts do not limit you. Their prejudice is not your prison. You are capable of brilliance they cannot even imagine. You have gifts they are too blind to see. And if you keep going, if you refuse to accept their definition of your worth, you will build things that make their skepticism look like the small, sad thing it truly is. So I ask you now, what impossible test are you facing? Who is trying to convince you that you don't belong? And what are you going to build from the fire of their doubt? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. Because your story matters, not just to you, but to everyone who needs to know that survival is possible, that victory is attainable, that brilliance exists in every community. If this story moved you, please subscribe to this channel. Hit that notification bell. Share this video with a student who's struggling, a teacher who needs reminding, a parent who's investing everything in a dream. They need to know they're not alone. They need to know that the story doesn't end with the struggle. They can set impossible tests. They can question your right to exist. They can try to write you out of the equation. But they can never, ever subtract your value. Stay brilliant, stay resilient, and never stop solving.